When I was 15 years old, I spent a brief stint that summer, the summer of 2013, power washing fences to try to raise $100 to back towards a Kickstarter campaign. This campaign, of course, was for Mighty No. 9, brainchild of former Megaman series head Keiji Inafune. Now, I was and still am a massive Megaman fan, but at that time, I thought that the series involving a little blue robot boy who had to go through a non-linear set of levels and indeed steal powers from other robots would never gain a new entry. So in 2013, Keiji Inafune made this Kickstarter, and it reached its funding goal in 2 days. But then years went by, promises were made, and many of them weren't kept. Indeed, in 2016, when the game launched, we got a product that angered some and disappointed many, myself included. But today we are not talking about the game that could have been, nor are we putting down Keiji Inafune or indeed the Kickstarter platform itself. Instead, through interviews, research, and analysis, we're going to try to get the true development story of Mighty No. 9. Welcome to the Art of Failure. We start in 1987 with Keiji Inafune, age 22. We start here specifically for 2 reasons. The first is that due to Mighty No. 9 being Inafune's brainchild and his own reputation being used to help raise funds for the title, we need to examine his career up to Mighty No. 9's conception to truly understand what many expected from this game. The second is that many of the other key players in the story of Mighty No. 9 would first meet Inafune while he was at Capcom, a company that he would first join in 1987, shortly after graduating from Osaka's Designers College with a degree in graphic design. Soon after joining the company, he would be put to work on his first project as a character artist, the 1987 arcade title Street Fighter, in which he was tasked with drawing portraits for the various fighters. Despite there being a fairly quick turnaround for this project, Inafune's colleagues were nonetheless impressed by his work. Immediately after he completed this project, he would find his way onto the team for another game, one that would come to shape his work for the next several decades. The original Rockman for the Nintendo Famicom game system, which would later find its way to the West's Nintendo Entertainment System as Megaman. The Megaman project had been started some months earlier by Akira Kitamura, an often reclusive game designer whom Inafune would recall as seeking perfection in every aspect of game development. By the time Inafune was brought on board, most of the game's assets were completed, with he himself only designing several minor enemies, the game's Japanese logo, and the boss Lekman. He also found himself responsible for converting the already established character art into 8-bit sprites that would appear within the game itself. The Megaman team was dedicated, though it was also small, with the main game team consisting of only 5 main people, plus a soundtrack by Minami Matsume. It would also feature game mechanics quite different from those of any other NES game. Unlike other popular side-scrolling platformers of the time, such as Super Mario Bros., in which the player advanced through the game in a linear fashion, Mega Man instead presents players from the outset with 6 stages to choose from. While some are definitely harder than others, these 6 stages can be tackled in any order, and each contains a theme and a boss centered around that theme. It's up to you as Mega Man to go through each of these stages by running, jumping, and shooting. Your default weapon is rather limited, being a pea shooter that can only aim left or right, but additional weapons can be obtained as permanent upgrades by defeating each boss, with each weapon being themed around the respective boss they're obtained from. Upon release on the 17th of December 1987, it was met with overwhelmingly positive reception from critics. However, it would ultimately sell poorly. Capcom's higher-ups would decide to cut their losses and be done with the Mega Man IP at this point, but several of those involved, namely game director Akira Kitamura, felt that the Mega Man formula could be vastly improved from this point. In early 1988, Kitamura made an agreement with Capcom's vice president, where they'd be allowed to make the sequel as long as it served mainly as a side project, and the team worked on other games as well. And from the get-go, this sequel was planned to be a bigger, better Mega Man. Many characters and enemies that had been designed by Kitamura and Inafune yet were scrapped from the first game made their way into this new title. In addition, Capcom held a contest throughout Japan where people could send in their own hand-drawn suggestions for bosses. By the end of this contest, the team had received over 8,000 entries. The final game would feature only 8 bosses to choose from, though this was still an increase from the original game's 6. Inafune would also take an increased role in the sequel. The team would expand a bit, and he would soon find himself no longer as the most inexperienced person on the team, at one point saying,
"Working on Mega Man 2 marked my second year at this. I even got to mentor a new kid, which opened up a whole new world of stress for me."
Despite these stresses, Mega Man 2 would be completed in an extraordinary 3.5 months. The game would feature a more polished look from the original game, along with more stages, a password system, and in the North American release, a difficulty select. Upon its release on Christmas Eve 1988, the title was a smash hit. Critics loved Mega Man 2, and the majority of gamers around the world seemed to love it as well. It would go on to be the best-selling title in the Mega Man series, and today is considered by many to be the best that the series has to offer. Even Inafune himself would later state that this was a title that made Mega Man popular. Kitamura would leave Capcom following Mega Man 2's success, though Capcom's higher-ups wanted a follow-up. In 1990, Mega Man 3 was released, and was another huge success. However, Inafune had an even more pronounced role in its development, which he often described as being varying degrees of hellish. Following that title, a new Mega Man game would be released yearly for most of the next decade, with Inafune having increasing amounts of influence over the series. He would be one of the minds behind the hit spin-off Mega Man series Mega Man X in 1993, being responsible for many of the character designs, including that of one of his all-time favorite characters, the bright red, long-haired Zero. However, he would not actually be a producer on a Mega Man game until 1996's Mega Man 8, released nearly a decade into the series' life. Despite this, every mainline Mega Man game up to this point was made with some sort of involvement from Inafune. Due to this, many would begin to claim that he was the father of Mega Man. Though it is unclear how this misconception began, it likely began through mistranslations of Japanese gaming articles in the 1990s, though it would take some time to be widely adopted by Western media. Ironically, the first instance of the phrase being used in an English article was in a 2007 interview at the Tokyo Game Show with GameSpot, which Inafune would state,
"I'm often called the father of Mega Man, but actually his design was already there when I joined Capcom."
Back in the mid-90s, around the time Mega Man 8 was released, Inafune came up with an idea for a next-generation Mega Man title, one which would bring the run-and-gun platforming of the classic titles into a 3D environment, and combine them with role-playing game elements. Released in 1997, this would be Mega Man Legends for the Sony PlayStation. Despite poor sales and complaints of clunky controls, this title would gain a cult following, a direct sequel, a spin-off, and supposedly become Inafune's favorite title in the entire franchise. Infamously, Mega Man Legends 2 would end on a cliffhanger, though Inafune would be unable to begin on a follow-up for quite some time. At the beginning of the new millennium, Capcom seemed to be on top of the world. Hit titles were coming out on a regular basis, with a mix of acclaimed industry veterans and hand-picked newcomers working on a wide variety of games ranging from classic action platformers such as Mega Man to the smash hit horror series Resident Evil. In 2002, Ben Judd would join the company. Though most at Capcom had been born and raised in Japan, Judd instead originally come from Ohio in the United States. Judd had gained years of experience working as a translator. Indeed, was set to work by the company working on English translations for Devil May Cry 2, Mega Man and Bass, and Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, where he also doubled as the original voice actor for the titular character. In addition, he would MC official events held by the company to promote new releases. Capcom was a dream job of sorts for Judd, who had been a longtime fan of titles such as Bionic Commando. Within a few years though, he had taken a higher position at Capcom Japan as a producer. Granted, he was also offered a position as head of PR at Capcom USA in California, but opted to stay in Japan at their main offices because, and I quote, "the power is in the mothership."
A lot of people have big dreams. They start out and they say, I want to make a video game. But there are so many tiny steps you have to take to get to that point. So I set my next goal, which is, I said, hey, I want to live in Japan. Then, hey, I want to learn how to speak Japanese. Then, hey, I want to be able to do a job where I use my Japanese. and hey, I want to join a video game company, and hey, I want to do something big at that video game company, and then finally, hey, I want to make my own game. And so I had to clear all these tiny goals to get there. But eventually that did lead me into Capcom US, and then later, a year later, Capcom Japan. And then after I built their localization team from the ground up, and it was saving the company anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million a year, they pretty much said, you can be the head of PR in the US, or you can be a producer here and make a game, and I chose the latter.
Also in 2002, Mega Man Zero would be released for the Game Boy Advance. This would be the first title in a series not to be developed by Capcom themselves, but rather Inti Creates, which was a development studio formed by ex-Capcom staff in 1996. Inafune was nonetheless quite involved and very pleased with this new take on one of his personal favorite Mega Man characters. Judd would describe this era as Capcom's golden age, due to the high number of talented individuals who are creating high-profile titles that have since gained massive followings. Over the next several years, games would continue to come out from Capcom, but the number of new original titles was soon dwarfed by sequels and reboots of existing franchises. In 2006, Inafune would receive a promotion to senior corporate officer at Capcom, giving him more power than he ever had before at the company. Yet, in the years directly leading up to this promotion, he had begun to become critical of Japan's game industry, particularly as long-running Japanese series began to fall behind in sales compared to Western-developed series such as Halo. This, he believed, was due to a stagnation and a lack of original, globally viable ideas from Japanese developers. His first course of action was to have Capcom begin developing titles aimed at Western audiences. The first game that he himself would work on under this position would be 2006's Dead Rising. Originally meant to just capitalize on the zombie media craze in North America during this time, upon release, it was a critical and commercial success. It was also during Dead Rising's development that Inafune and Judd would first become acquainted. They would get along quite well, with Judd serving as his translator for events and interviews, and they would even develop a friendship. Inafune would continue his attempts to rekindle what he saw as a failing Japanese game industry over the next several years, often by trying to do new or unique takes on existing franchises. Some of these, such as 2009's Bionic Commando reboot, which Judd produced, would garner mixed reception, while others such as 2008's Mega Man 9 would go on to massive success. Mega Man 9 in particular was a game held in high regard by the press. Another title developed by Inti Creates, with Inafune serving as producer, this game aimed to replicate the mechanics, look, and feel of the NES-era Mega Man titles, going so far as to limit Mega Man's basic abilities to those that he had in the fan-favorite Mega Man 2. But not all was perfect at Capcom Japan, or indeed with Inafune himself during this time. Despite often denying the title, many news outlets began to refer to Inafune as the father of Mega Man. Furthermore, though Mega Man 9 itself was a love letter to an era in which Japanese game studios were on top of the world, he continued to be increasingly critical of his home country's video game industry. Infamously, at the 2009 Tokyo Game Show, he would say,
"Man, Japan is over. We're done. Our game industry is finished."
Inafune also began to feel that he had truly done as much as he could at Capcom, yet work on titles continued. In 2010, Mega Man 10 would be released, which would continue in the NES-inspired style of Mega Man 9. Meanwhile, several new, more original Mega Man projects would begin development. The first of these would be Mega Man Universe, a pseudo-remake of Mega Man 2 featuring the ability for players to create their own levels and playable characters, which could then be shared online. Produced in-house at Capcom, Inafune would serve as lead designer on this title. The second of these would be a first-person reboot of the Mega Man X series, simply titled Maverick Hunter, developed by the then newly formed Armature Studios by developers who had cut their teeth working on the Metroid Prime games. Development of this title would be overseen by Judd. The final and biggest of these projects would be Mega Man Legends 3. Announced for the upcoming Nintendo 3DS handheld, this title would serve as the epic conclusion for one of Inafune's personal favorite Mega Man side series. It also took several major risks during its development, the biggest of these being opening many aspects of the game's development to suggestions and submissions from fans. Thus, things ranging from weapons to even major character designs then could be voted on by fans around the world. The method in which all of this was conducted by Capcom has been described by many as a sort of predecessors to games created on crowdfunding platforms such as Kickstarter. And then, on the 29th of October 2010, after getting these projects to a point in which he thought they could go on without him, Inafune, after 23 years, would resign from his job at Capcom. He felt that if he truly wanted the Japanese games industry to be back on top, he'd have to set out and do it himself, and that at Capcom he was not in a position where he could truly do something radical or original, saying in an interview with Silicon Era,
"For some years I tried doing the same thing from within Capcom. Take this for example, I was the head of development. That means I was actually at the top of Capcom, I couldn't go any higher. So it was best for me to just be a salaryman, not doing anything new as to avoid failing, not doing anything outstanding, quietly dealing with what I was told, because if I did anything brashly and failed, I would no longer be in that position."
This did not go over well at Capcom. In the years preceding Inafune's departure, most of whom had been considered Capcom's golden boys had left the company. Indeed, Judd too would also leave shortly after Inafune's departure, yet they soon found themselves with positions at other companies. Judd became Director of Business Development at video game agency Digital Development Management, or DDM for short, while in December 2010 Inafune would found two separate companies. These would be Intercept, a video game development house, and Concept, a video game idea and design house. In 2011, he would also take control of yet another company, smartphone game developer Ding. While many were skeptical of his ability to lead three companies at once without burning himself out, Inafune continued to work full speed ahead. As far as Judd and Inafune could see, the future was bright.
True creators, people who can create an IP from the ground up, are incredibly rare. And you'll maybe, if you're lucky, have one of them in a company. Capcom had like 4 of them. But then a lot of those people left. And so when they left, I felt that it was time to move on. And DDM, I had 3 different opportunities on the table. One was to go join Gree's San Francisco office as a producer. Glad I didn't do that. Another was to work at Concept. And while I definitely like Inafune-san as a person, I didn't want to work directly with him because I had already done that, and I felt like I wanted to do something new. And then DDM, of course, which is it's going to sound like a tagline, it's the world's largest video game specific agency. I figured if I worked with them, I would be able to work with more creatives, I'd be able to work on different projects. I wouldn't be limited to Capcom. I'd be able to work with Konami and Square and Sony and Nintendo and everybody. And so that was the exciting part that kind of drew me in there. And so I left Capcom at the end of, it was December 2010, and I joined DDM in January 2011.
Then, in 2011, Capcom would cancel every single Megaman title in the works, including the heavily fan-involved Megaman Legends 3. Whether done due to the company's lacking direction, higher-ups wanting to slight Inafune, or purely for business reasons, this is unknown. In the meantime, it seemed that the Megaman series was dead.
Please count with us. いいですか? じゃあどうぞ.
じゃあいきますよ。
Here we go.
Right.
And
Mighty number 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
On the 30th of August 2013 at the Penny Arcade Expo in Seattle, Washington, Keiji Inafune would announce his spiritual successor to the Mega Man series. This was Mighty Number 9. This would not be the first title worked on by Inafune's new company, Concept. In 2011, work would begin on Kaio King of Pirates for the Nintendo 3DS, a title developed by Inafune's studio Intercept based off the Romance of the Three Kingdoms story. In addition, in 2012, Concept would begin collaborating with several other developers to create Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, a title that, upon release, was almost universally panned by the press. Perhaps the most successful title worked on by Inafune in the years up to Mighty Number 9's announcement was from his mobile studio, Ding. Boiling Osan Eggs was a Japanese exclusive smartphone game in which you had to open up hard-boiled eggs that looked like disgruntled Japanese businessmen, and of course you had to try to collect them all. Despite its simplicity and being intended as nothing more than a playable joke, it did incredibly well after its release on the 13th of April, 2013. So this brings us back to that August. Mighty Number 9, after months of careful planning, had been announced. Many at the time joked that it was just a Megaman game with some names and graphics changed around, but for many fans disgruntled by Capcom's treatment of the series at that point, this was more than enough. In a way that echoed the methods used with the cancelled Mega Man Legends 3, Inafune announced that the title was going to be funded not by a corporate entity, but rather through fans via Kickstarter. Those who backed in tiers ranging anywhere from $1 USD to upwards of $10,000 could get their name in the game's credit, be guaranteed a download code for the then digital-only title, and even potentially design characters or meet Inafune himself. Kickstarter seemed to be a natural fit for Mighty Number 9, as several other retro game-inspired projects had been successfully funded on there. The most famous of these perhaps was 2014's Shovel Knight, which had gone on to raise over $300,000 and, upon release, was a critical and commercial smash hit. Even if he had denied being the father of Mega Man up to this point, Inafune more than happily used his connection to the series to help promote Mighty Number 9, with numerous media outlets prefacing interviews with him as the Mega Man series creator or an interview with the father of Mega Man, and it worked. Within 2 days of the Kickstarter campaign's launch, the game had surpassed its lofty $900,000 USD goal, and a month later at the campaign's end, the title had raised nearly $4 million from nearly 70,000 different backers from all around the world. Of course, while many attributed the many promises and ultimate success of this Kickstarter campaign to Inafune himself, he was not alone in this endeavor. Mighty Number 9 was to be jointly developed between Concept, who is an ideas house which was responsible for the core ideas of the game and character designs, and developer Inti Creates, who would handle the actual programming work. San Francisco-based production company 2Player Productions would also begin work on an official 4-part documentary series that would follow the project. All of this was to be done with consistent updates to backers on Kickstarter, with Inafune promising those who backed unprecedented access. This Kickstarter campaign itself would be organized by Ben Judd. Though he had passed up an opportunity to work at Concept directly back in 2011, instead taking works at games industry agency DDM, he soon found himself working with Inafune on this project.
So traditionally you need about 3 months of build-up. And so probably about 6 months before that, we had passed the idea back and forth. It took a while for all the pieces to come together, but once they did and we were planning, it was about 3 months of just hard work, wear and tear, and a few 10-hour meetings. There's lots of unknowns, and so it's scary you're basically trying to set price points for 100 different items instead of just one. And it's a very delicate jigsaw puzzle that has to fit together. And if you make one promise that you're way off on, and quite frankly, Mighty Number 9 was way off on, the amount of money that would be necessary to do 10 different SKUs. It's a lot of work. People don't realize how much financial risk that includes. Then you're screwed.
From the get-go, Mighty Number 9 promised a lot. Some would argue too much. Development screenshots showed a game with a hand-drawn-esque art style, reminiscent of many popular indie games of the time. The game had huge names on it who had tons of experience with the video games industry, including a soundtrack by Manami Matsume, who had done the soundtrack for the original Mega Man game. Kickstarter backers were also able to get t-shirts, posters, NES-style boxes, and more, all handled by Merch House Fangamer. While the game itself was going to include an ever-increasing number of stages, Mega Man-esque weapon and platforming mechanics, and even an online mode. Perhaps loftiest of these promises, Mighty Number 9 was promised for 10 different platforms. Initially just planned to be released for PCs via Steam, ports were soon also promised for Linux, Mac OS X, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii U, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PlayStation Vita, and perhaps most daunting for the development team, the Nintendo 3DS. While $4 million seems like a hefty sum of money, which it most certainly is, and while other Kickstarters have produced successful games with far less, it can be debated that this was actually a much lower amount than those involved with Mighty Number 9 were used to working with. By comparison, 2010's Mega Man 10 only came out for 3 platforms, but had a higher budget. But in 2013, $4 million seemed like more than enough to make an incredible game. Indeed, by the end of the Kickstarter campaign, the title had set several crowdfunding records. The team at Concept was overjoyed, to say the least.
I think at the time it was number one, so I was like, yes, number one, we're so awesome, and you're drinking your Kool-Aid and you're getting all excited. And quite frankly, a lot of people don't realize this, but when you first do a project internally and it gets approved, you feel the same euphoria. You're like, I'm making a video game and it's going to be so awesome. And there's no video games are bad in the beginning. They're all perfect in the beginning. It's just as you start to build them out and the realities of how much money it takes, how much time, the difficult challenges, etc. When those start to come in, you realize, okay, our game may not be perfect anymore. That's when the harsh reality starts to set in. But at the time when it was over, I couldn't believe it. I was so hopeful. I was so amazed that it went that high. I was so thankful to everybody that supported it. It's people want to believe in a dream, and it seemed like the dream was there, right? People were going to get that dream.
The dream was definitely there, and people most definitely believed in it. News outlets hailed the title as the return of Megaman, and Inafune was placed on a metaphorical pedestal by many. Updates came from the campaign on an almost daily basis during that first month, featuring everything from community polls and character designs to behind-the-scenes looks and development, and even the making of the official Kickstarter pitch video. The first episode of Two Players' official 4-part documentary series was released on the 26th of September 2013, days before the campaign itself was even completed. On the 1st of October 2013, Mighty No. 9 was successfully funded on Kickstarter and slated for a release date of spring 2015. Updates continued at a fairly steady pace, with an official website and backer forum being launched in November 2013. However, problems were already on the horizon. Workplace culture at Concept and Indie Creates was overall very positive, and the positive workplace images that were shown publicly were representative of the company itself. Progress in the game was continuing at a steady pace, and it wasn't too long before there was a mostly stable playable build. Yet despite the $4 million raised, some cost-saving measures were decided on. After the successful funding of the project, an estimated $190,000 USD had to be paid out to Kickstarter themselves, as that platform takes around a 5% cut of every project successfully funded. From there, roughly 20% of the money raised was then allotted for backer rewards, with additional funds set aside for advertising and paying those involved, among other things. And then came the biggest issue of all: how to make a game that can run on something as powerful as the most powerful PCs of the time, as well as the Nintendo 3DS, which some compared to the then already aging Nintendo Wii in terms of power. One of the first areas to be scaled back was the graphics. Instead of the hand-drawn aesthetic that was shown off in the original concept art, a more basic 3D cel-shaded approach was decided on. In addition, the number of character animations were also cut back, drastically so in cutscenes where ultimately character mouths didn't move. Then came some more serious issues, such as getting the game's engine, Unreal Engine 3, to work on the 3DS.
So I figured it would get finished, but I feared that it would get finished and not be a great game, which, as we know, it ended up being, which is very unfortunate. But again, there are many reasons. The engine probably wasn't suitable for doing 3DS. Inti was much better at doing 2D than they were like 2.5D, which is what it was based in, because the engine, trying to do 10 SKUs, Inti wasn't super at the time familiar with online. They're much better now. Dragon Mark for Death is going to be awesome. So it was a very unfortunate choice of the tech didn't work as efficiently as we had hoped per SKU. I think the online stuff ended up being a lot more hassle and work than anybody ever thought, especially across 10 different SKUs. It's always a challenge, online stuff is. And then the amount of money just wasn't there to do all of that stuff that they needed. So corners had to be cut. That was the reality.
Progress still continued at a steady pace, and the first digital backer rewards began to come out in early 2014. Perhaps the most anticipated of these was the release of Mighty Gunvolt, a small 3DS minigame which was very much an homage to NES-era platformers, such as the original Megaman games. This small title featured both Mighty No. 9's protagonist Beck, along with characters from Indie Creates' Galgun and Azure Striker Gunvolt series. Overall loved by most backers despite its bite-sized length, Mighty Gunvolt made many feel further confidence in the Mighty No. 9 team. Many also assumed that Beck's gameplay here was a teaser for what was to come. That same year, however, Concept began searching for additional funding for Mighty No. 9. That July at the Los Angeles Anime Expo, Inafune announced both a Mighty No. 9 anime series along with a new round of funding for the game via PayPal. The end goal of this new funding campaign? $100,000 in order to add in English voice acting. At the same time in Japan, yet another campaign was begun on crowdfunding site Makuake to raise yet another roughly $100,000. The goal here? Japanese voice acting. Fan reception was mixed to say the least, though overall backer reception was still rather positive during this time. For many, it was obvious that Inafune wanted Mighty No. 9 to be more than just a spiritual comeback from Megaman. He wanted to make a long-running multimedia series. Within a few months, though, it was obvious that both of these additional campaigns had been unsuccessful. By October 2014, of the total $200,000 asked for voice acting, only $20,000 total had been raised. These secondary campaigns were soon dropped, and Inafune decided to instead divert $80,000 from elsewhere in the game's budget to fund the voice acting. A community poll was hosted to decide which language it would be in, as there wasn't enough money available for both English and Japanese. Ultimately, backers decided that the game, though having text in multiple languages, would ship with English voice acting. On the 30th of October 2014, though, yet another call for additional funding was announced by Concept. This time it was for additional downloadable content, the most notable of which involved a new character named Ray, who is quite obviously a nod to Zero from the Mega Man X series. The total cost for this? $198,000. It was from here that communication between Concept and backers would begin to slow. The Kickstarter page itself started receiving fewer and fewer updates, and many of the updates that were given were instead put on the official Mighty No. 9 website, which had the major downside of not alerting backers via email whenever they were posted. Many would perhaps find this odd, as development was still continuing at a steady rate. In January 2015, a video was released in which Inafune stated that the title was more or less finished, which it technically was. The PC version was mostly complete, with the main issues being bug testing and, of course, the online features. Mighty No. 9's online modes proved to be especially problematic throughout development, as Inti Creates lacked experience in creating online modes in games at this point. While the main single-player mode was almost complete, online was borderline unplayable. Not wanting to ship an unfinished product or have to patch in the online features at a later date, those at Concept and Inti Creates began to debate delaying release. At the very least, the portable versions were for sure going to have to be pushed back, as those were especially problematic. In April 2015, Concept would announce that the game had finally found a publisher, Deep Silver. Established in 2002, Deep Silver was a German publisher famous for titles such as the Saints Row games. In addition, Mighty No. 9 was announced to have voice acting in several languages, with subtitles and even more. This, though, was not without issues. Along with publishing the game, Deep Silver would also be releasing physical versions of Mighty No. 9 for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Wii U. This was considered an overall plus by those involved in development, as originally there had been no plans for physical release. But due to these being handled by Deep Silver and not Fangamer, who's responsible for merchandising, there was no way for those who had backed the game and were promised physical rewards to instead request a physical copy of the game. It should be mentioned too that this announcement was made less than a month after Concept quietly discontinued their title, Kaio King of Pirates for the 3DS, and also closed sister company Intercept. The physical release announcement did not go over well with many backers, with some feeling quite outraged. Perhaps even worse, the title was officially given its first of several delays, being pushed back from its tentative spring 2015 release date to September of that year. The main reason? Continued issues with online features. Things only got muddier on the 2nd of July 2015 when Concept posted a trailer for yet another game, Red Ash, the Indelible Legend. 2 days later, on the 4th of July 2015, 2 separate Kickstarters were launched for that title. One was for the game itself, handled directly by Concept, and another for an anime adaptation handled by Studio 4C, titled Red Ash Magic Cicada, and later Red Ash Gear World.
We felt that doing Red Ash was premature and that they absolutely needed to finish the first Kickstarter campaign with good results before they went back and did another one. I understand Western thinking, and my biggest fear was it would come off as looking as greedy, and sure enough, I feel that's what it ended up being.
The quality of the game's campaign itself, particularly its campaign video, were of a much lower quality than those for the anime adaptations campaign, and indeed Mighty No. 9, and despite being a spiritual successor to the Mega Man Legends series and potentially being a chance for longtime fans to get something sort of like Mega Man Legends 3, it ultimately only raised $520,000 of its $800,000 goal, with many citing it as unprofessional for Inafune to start a new Kickstarter campaign before his first Kickstarter game had been completed. Red Ash Gear World, however, was successfully funded and would eventually be released in March 2017, though to mixed reception. Despite the failure of the Red Ash game campaign, on the 30th of July 2015, Concept announced that the game had received funding from Chinese company Fuse. Shortly after, a very basic playable demo was released, though it left much to be desired by many. In particular, issue was taken by many with the Red Ash demo using placeholder assets from Mighty No. 9, despite there still not being a playable demo of that game out. Red Ash updates did not continue for long, and as of 2019, the title still has a listed release date of to be announced. Though he had advised against it, it is debatable if Judd, despite his friendship and good working relationship with Inafune, could have persuaded him to have stopped or delayed the Red Ash Kickstarters, especially as that previous month in June 2015, he had helped game designer Koji Igarashi successfully launch a Kickstarter campaign for the Castlevania-inspired Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. Much like Mighty No. 9, he had required a minimum of 3 months of planning beforehand. It noticeably was promised for fewer platforms, despite surpassing Mighty No. 9's funding records by raising over $5.5 million from backers. Back in the Mighty No. 9 camp, seeds of doubt were being stirred within many, especially as rumors of yet another delay began to surface. This angered many yet again, with several backers threatening to cancel their pledges and some actually following through with that. On the 5th of August 2015, the rumors were confirmed. The game was going to be pushed back from its then release date of the 15th of September 2015 to a vague spring 2016, once again citing online multiplayer issues. At this point, many backers asked those at Concept and Indie Creates to just split the online features and release the original single-player adventure alone, though this was apparently opted against so as to not affect the retail price. According to Inafune, though, this was ultimately Deep Silver's call, stating,
"We actually brought this up to Deep Silver, the publisher, and from their point of view, a business side point of view, this way of marketing the game is not going to end up well, business-wise."
Perhaps as a concession, a promise was made that a playable demo would be released on the original planned release date of the 15th of September 2015. However, that too would eventually be delayed until the 25th of September 2015, with Concept citing distribution issues. It should be mentioned as well that instead of addressing this directly, this was originally just noted by Concept as an addendum to a post about a Mighty No. 9 art contest, and not immediately posted to the Kickstarter page. This would not be noted there until days later on the 18th of September 2015. But then, on the 25th of September, the Mighty No. 9 demo was released via Steam for computers. Coincidentally, on that day the official Mighty No. 9 release date was also unveiled, the 9th of February 2016. The demo was finally here, and though not as polished as many expected, it was overall incredibly well received. To many longtime Mega Man fans, it seemed that Inafune, Concept, Indie Creates, Deep Silver, and everyone involved had truly delivered the spiritual successor that they had been hoping for. Little did they know, the game still had nearly a year left until its final release.
Absorption boost. You kill an enemy and you can absorb their power-ups, stuff that'll make you faster and stronger and make the bad guys cry like an anime fan on prom night.
On the 25th of May 2016, Deep Silver would release Masterclass, the official launch trailer for Mighty No. 9. As can be seen from its like to dislike ratio on YouTube, it was very poorly received. Despite showing a game that looked much different than that shown initially on Kickstarter, what truly incensed folks about this trailer was its overblown, debatably insulting style and tone. Indeed, Inti Create's chief executive Takuya Aizu would angrily take to Twitter, echoing sentiments of others involved with the game by stating, "What the hell was Deep Silver thinking making a crappy PV like this? Unforgivable." The game had also missed its February release date, with that replaced on most outlets with just a general date of 2016. However, on the 2nd of May 2016, Inafune would release a statement saying,
"Firstly, I would like to say again how sincerely sorry we are for how long we have kept all of our fans waiting. We're finally able to deliver some long-awaited news regarding Mighty No. 9. We have now confirmed the following release dates for Mighty No. 9. June 21st, 2016 in North America and Asia, and June 24th, 2016 worldwide. We understand that as a result of these various delays that we have disappointed and let down our fans. But we are happy to finally be able to deliver the game to everyone who brought us this far."
He would follow by noting that the PlayStation Vita and Nintendo 3DS versions would follow at a later point. It seemed that, aside from issues with the now outdated Unreal Engine 3 running on portable systems, and after years of delays and increasing communications issues, Mighty No. 9 was finally going to be released. This time, for real. Some backers were optimistic, remembering the positive reception from the previous year's demo. Others were much more cynical. Things only got worse once press copies of the game were sent out. Critic Michael McWhertor of Polygon would say of the game,
"Squint your eyes hard enough and you might be convinced for a passing moment that Mighty No. 9 makes good on its promises. But when you open your eyes, it plays like the answer to the question, why doesn't Capcom make Megaman games anymore?"
Though Chris Carter of Destructoid was a bit more positive, saying,
"Following Mighty No. 9 has been one hell of a ride. Having backed it in 2013 at a low pledge level, I can't say that I'm exactly disappointed with the end result. It still has a lot of baggage to unload. The 3DS and Vita ports aren't even dated yet, but most Mega Man fans will find solace in the fact that it didn't end up being a disaster. Other than the art style, of course."
Though upon launch, the response from backers and the general gaming public was lackluster at best. This was compounded by there being numerous issues with backer rewards. Several perks were delayed. Some, such as game boxes, didn't arrive until a year later in 2017, with the promised full-color manual actually just being in black and white. In addition, the second part of 2-Player Productions' official documentary was finally released, though the final 2 episodes apparently were never released publicly. The Nintendo Wii U version was also infamously plagued with issues, with these including glitches, slowdown, long load times, and at launch, the possibility of not only crashing, but also potentially bricking Wii U systems, rendering the console itself unusable. To say this sparked outrage would be to put it lightly. But yet, after years of issues, Mighty No. 9 had at the very least come out, and despite all of the negative press, there were some people, particularly owners of the PC and more modern console versions, who were having positive experiences with the game. But for many, just coming out and being playable was not nearly enough. To some, it seemed that Inafune's career was over, and his reputation ruined. Things reached a low point during a launch livestream and Q&A session that was held on the 22nd of June 2016. During the stream, Inafune, along with Judd, who was operating both as his translator and stream MC, took questions from viewers. Finally, questions were asked on whether there were any plans to expand the Mighty No. 9 franchise or add any additional DLC. Upon translating Inafune's answer, which was a rather terse "there is not any additional DLC besides the Ray DLC, Judd took a small breath and decided to weigh in his personal thoughts on the project, as he too had been heavily involved with it from the beginning.
For now, this is what you see and what you get for the Mighty No. 9 world, but again, we can hope that if things go well, there'll be sequels, because I'll tell you what, I'm not getting my 2D side-scrolling fill, and at the end of the day, even if it's not perfect, it's better than nothing. At least that's my opinion.
I pride myself on my translation skill. Probably anybody who's worked with me in the industry would say Ben Judd is a damn fine translator. And I have a certain style that I think more translators, interpreters rather, should use. But basically, I had never streamed anything before myself as a host. And they said, we're going to do this after party. We need you to come up. And I'm like, oh, just totally wasn't mentally ready for it. I had never done anything like that before. And so as somebody who has interpreted on the fly and am pretty good flying by the seat of my pants if I have to in a situation, I probably was the best guy for the job at the time. So I went up to Tokyo. We're having pizza. We're celebrating the game finally being out. And I'm like, well, we need to have like content. It needs to be like a TV, like a talk show, right? We need to have different people come on and talk about different things and do interviews and whatnot. But again, no prep time to do any of this. So go up there, flying by the seat of my pants, asking different questions. And then Inafune-san was on. And I was trying to ask him more positive questions than negative, because obviously by that time there were many people who were very mad, and many people who didn't like what they saw, and asking these questions. And I forget which one it was, but he had said something, and I was in a scenario where I was both the YouTuber, the streamer, but also the interpreter. So I was serving both of those roles. And in my mind, the YouTuber, as an interviewer, is trying to create a solid banter, a conversational flow between the guest and themselves. But then as the interpreter, I need to make sure that I'm translating what the other person is saying, because I can't have him say something to me in Japanese and me respond in English. People wouldn't understand what's going on. So I had two different goals that were at odds end. With each other. And basically, I had asked him a question. He had responded. I had then translated that response into English, but then to make it seem like there was organic banter, added in my opinion. And my opinion was, in fact, it's better than nothing, because I truly felt that there were no Megaman games at the time. And anybody who likes that sort of game, maybe it's not the best game in the world, but at least it's a game, rather than playing nothing. And so that was my catch-ball sort of reactive remark to what he said. But then later, because people wanted to, they came with the pitchforks and they wanted to stone somebody. They were very upset. They wanted to place the blame on him. And so it got misinterpreted as that was his comment.
Judd would later clarify that these were his own comments and not Inafune's on multiple occasions, but to this day many still attribute this perhaps poorly worded or poorly timed comment to Inafune. Even the official Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter account made a tweet poking fun at it. This did not bode well for Mighty No. 9. The bad press ultimately affected sales of the game. Within only a few months of release, physical Wii U and PlayStation 4 versions could be found at American retailer Target for $15 or less. Financially, things were beginning to look bleak for Concept. In early 2017, Concept was acquired by Yokai Watch creator Level 5 and renamed to Level 5 Concept. After this acquisition, it was promised that the PlayStation Vita and 3DS versions of Mighty No. 9 would finally be released by year-end 2017. Later that same year, the final batch of Mighty No. 9 rewards would finally begin to ship, a full 4 years after the end of the original Kickstarter campaign. The Mighty No. 9 animated series would also never see the light of day. As for Ding, Inafune's other company, there have been no new major titles since 2015. By the end of 2017, the 3DS and PlayStation Vita versions of Mighty No. 9 had not been released, and in January 2019, the 3DS version was formally removed from several official listings of upcoming 3DS titles. Judd by this time had moved on from working with the Mighty No. 9 team in Concept and was aiding other projects through his work at DDM, most notably Koji Igarashi's Bloodstained Ritual of the Night.
Both, critically and financially. It didn't make the money it needed to make, and certainly it didn't get any great Metacritic reviews. So it's very unfortunate. It was a test case in a lot of ways. It was very exciting. I learned a lot. I'm sure Inafune-san learned a lot. I hope that the people that invested in it learned something too. And all I can say is it's unfortunate that it didn't turn out to be the dream that we all wanted it to be.
Any Creates had moved on to other projects as well, one of which would be the only post-Mighty No. 9 appearance of its protagonist, Beck. Mighty Gunvolt Burst was released in June 2017 for the Nintendo 3DS and Nintendo Switch, and was made without any involvement from Concept. Greatly expanding upon the elements from the first Mighty Gunvolt minigame, this game featured a robust customizable weapon system, and was on the whole very positively received. Some even saw it as the game Mighty No. 9 should have been. As for Keiji Inafune, after Mighty No. 9's launch and mixed reception, he tried to avoid media attention, though continued to work at Level 5 Concept. Most in the video game industry would likely agree that he did not succeed in either of his goals of bringing the Megaman experience to a new generation, nor of breathing new life into the Japanese games industry. Inafune felt that he had gotten in way over his head with Mighty No. 9, and took full responsibility for its numerous issues.
You know, I want to word this in a way to explain some of the issues that come with trying to make a game of this size on different platforms. I kind of loathe to say this because I'm going to sound like I'm making an excuse, and I don't want to make excuses. I own all the problems that came with this game, and if you want to hurl insults at me, it's totally my fault. I am the key creator. I will own that responsibility.
Mighty No. 9 is a video game that I think most will agree had a lot of potential. However, I also think it's a game that most will agree was not a success. However, whether Mighty No. 9's failures solely rests on Keiji Inafune or rather on a variety of other factors, that's for you to decide. Though, I do wonder, when I backed that Kickstarter campaign back in 2013, was I putting money down on a video game or one man's dream of a video game? This is the art of failure.